A single policy shift in one nation can create ripple effects felt across the globe. This phenomenon, that illustrates the butterfly effect, is about to play out vividly in the global energy sector. With Donald Trump's administration focused on America first and energy dominance, the US energy landscape will see a significant boost, allowing the country to climb to the top of the oil exporter chart. For decades, the OPEC cartel, with its 23 member states, has held a firm grip on the global oil market, setting prices and dictating supply. But over the years, the US has strategically distanced itself from OPEC's influence, taking the position of direct competitor. US petroleum imports from cartel's members dropped from 45% in 2007 to 11% in 2021. Instead, the country has leaned heavily on neighboring allies like Canada and Mexico, which now account for 60% of its petroleum imports. Trump's push to break OPEC's monopoly and alter its market manipulation poses a serious challenge.
OPEC and OPEC nations are, as usual, ripping off the rest of the world. And I don't like it. Nobody should like it.
In such a sensitive oil market, these tensions demand calculated strategies as both sides weigh the risks of an escalating price war. Within the cartel, power is not evenly distributed. Nations like Saudi Arabia dominate decision-making, mostly due to their significant production capacity and reserves. However, Saudi interest is not Iraqi interest, which is not Iranian interest, and definitely not Nigerian interest. In this episode, we dive into the butterfly effect of America's pursuit of energy dominance and what it could mean for Nigeria. How does prosperity in one region cascade into hardship in another? And what does this mean for the global balance of power in energy? Let's connect the dots. The US is home to some of the world's most productive shale formations, like the Permian Basin, Marcellus Shale, and Bacon Formation. To access these reserves, the oil industry uses fracking, a technology developed in the 1940s. Innovation in horizontal drilling and advances in cost efficiency revolutionized its use in the early 2000s, driving an energy boom. The shale revolution was fueled by rising oil prices, unique land ownership laws that encouraged private exploration, and a favorable regulatory environment. Together, these factors put the US on a path to energy dominance. When Donald Trump first took office in 2017, he doubled down on this newfound energy dominance with his America First energy policy. His administration championed fossil fuels as the cornerstone of US energy independence and global leverage. It actively promoted US energy exports, strengthening America's position as a leading global supplier of natural gas and oil. Trump's administration rolled back environmental regulations, exited the Paris Climate Agreement, and fast-tracked major pipeline projects to strengthen the US energy sector. He introduced the American Energy Dominance Strategy, a bold plan to cement the US's role as a global energy leader. Trump promised to prioritize national interests over global goals. This approach transformed the US into a net energy exporter by 2019, a significant milestone. The US surge in oil and natural gas production has reshaped the global energy landscape, sending shockwaves through traditional markets. Achieving net energy exporter status marked a turning point for the US, reducing reliance on Middle Eastern oil and challenging the dominance of traditional energy suppliers. This energy independence also gave Washington a powerful new tool in its geopolitical arsenal: energy exports. Natural gas and oil became critical foreign policy levers, particularly in Europe. There, the US aimed to counteract Russia's influence by providing its allies with alternative energy sources, reducing their reliance on Russian oil and gas. The sheer scale of US production has also helped to keep global oil prices relatively low. This has diminished the geopolitical reach of traditional energy powerhouses like OPEC and Russia, whose influence often hinges on controlling supply to manipulate prices. However, this dynamic hasn't been without irony. Trump, who frequently criticized the cartel for its pricing tactics, became the first US president in over 3 decades to advocate for higher oil prices. During the pandemic, his administration sought cooperation from OPEC, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, urging production cuts to stabilize prices. This rare alignment of interests reveals the delicate balance of supply, demand, and geopolitics in the oil sector. Now, the US has regained its status as the largest crude oil producer globally. The country is producing more oil than any other country in history, with an average of 13 million barrels per day. The Energy Information Administration warns that by mid-2025, global oil production is projected to outpace demand, potentially leading to inventory surpluses and downward pressure on prices. Such scenario could strain the resilience of US producers who rely on profitable pricing to sustain operations, while also reviving tensions within OPEC as its member nations scramble to adapt. This shifts our focus to the cartel's internal affairs. The organization is struggling to maintain market relevance while navigating the diverging interests of its members, from production quotas to geopolitical rivalries. As the US begins to take the lion's share of the oil export market, OPEC faces mounting pressure to adapt its strategies and try one more time to align its members on a common objective. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries emerged in 1960 as a counterbalance to the Seven Sisters. These 7 companies dominated the global oil industry, controlling up to 85% of the world's petroleum reserves. Founded by Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela, OPEC sought to coordinate petroleum policies, stabilize markets, and secure equitable revenue for its member states. Over time, it expanded to include nations with shared goals of leveraging their oil resources for economic strength. OPEC's influence peaked in the 1970s, a decade shaped by geopolitical upheaval. The Arab oil embargo and the Iranian Revolution marked a turning point as the cartel leveraged these crises to assert its control over global oil markets. By the decade's end, OPEC controlled over 70% of global oil supply, commanding unparalleled power over pricing and production. But the following decades revealed cracks in its foundation. OPEC operates as a cartel, with members meeting regularly to agree on production targets. This coordination enables the organization to influence oil prices by managing supply. Benefits for the cartel members include economic stability, collective bargaining power, and technical assistance. By uniting under a shared agenda, OPEC empowers its members to mitigate market volatility and respond to crises effectively. But despite this cohesion on paper, the cartel grapples with internal divisions driven by geopolitical and economic disparities. Members like Iraq and Nigeria frequently exceed their quotas, destabilizing market strategies. And geopolitical tensions such as those between Saudi Arabia and Iran frequently create competing priorities within the cartel. Further complicating consensus building, wealthier nations within the cartel tend to support strategies that emphasize maintaining market share, while countries like Venezuela advocate for increased prices to bolster their struggling economies. OPEC addresses these tensions through dialogues, mediation, and alliances with influential non-members like Russia. In recent decades, OPEC's dominance has dwindled significantly as many threats to the cartel have emerged. The US, Brazil, and emerging oil nations like Guyana have all increased production, reducing OPEC's share of global output from its peak over 70% to a little over 30% today. The cartel's relevance is further undermined by shifting global dynamics. Slower demand growth, particularly from major consumers like China, combined with rising oil production, increases the risk of a supply surplus and heightened price instability. At the same time, the accelerating transition to renewables and electric vehicles poses a long-term threat to oil demand, casting doubt on the cartel's ability to maintain its influence in the decades to come. Given these challenges, certain cartel members face interesting decisions. For Nigeria, these issues may present a compelling case for reconsidering its membership. When Nigeria joined OPEC in the early 70s, the country hit the jackpot. Back then, oil companies called the shots. By becoming a member, Nigeria gained a seat at the table, negotiating better deals and raking in massive revenues. In 1973, Nigerian oil revenue stood at $1 billion, but 8 years later, it skyrocketed to more than $9 billion, all thanks to OPEC's price stabilizing strategies. Membership in the cartel elevated Nigeria's global reputation, positioning it as a key player in international oil politics. Nigerian leaders even held prominent roles in the organization, using this platform to shape conversations about oil, but also about Africa's role in global markets. On the technical side, being part of the cartel gave Nigeria access to expertise and best practices in oil production. This was crucial for developing the country's oil infrastructure in its early days as a producer. However, Nigeria's relationship with the cartel has become more complex over time. Today, that initial shine has dulled. OPEC's production quotas, designed to stabilize global oil prices, have become a double-edged sword for Nigeria. On one hand, they promise stability, but on the other, they constrain a nation heavily dependent on oil revenues. For a country where oil accounts for 80% of government revenue and 95% of export earnings, cutting production means slashing income. And if we are being honest, Nigeria often struggled to meet these quotas anyway. In March 2024, the country produced 1.2 million barrels per day, falling short of its cartel's quota of 1.5 million. This consistent underperformance is the result of pipeline vandalism, oil theft, and aging infrastructure. While exceeding quotas might seem like a quick fix, it often damages Nigeria's credibility and invites penalties. Adding to these challenges are the organization's internal dynamics. The cartel's top players, like Saudi Arabia, often have different priorities. While Riyadh focuses on keeping prices high, with a balanced production approach, Nigeria wants to maximize production to fill its fiscal gaps. And it's not just Saudi Arabia. Other oil-producing nations, like Algeria and non-member Morocco, are competing with Nigeria in the natural gas space, particularly in supplying Europe. These geopolitical rivalries make OPEC less of a united front and more of a battleground. Then, there's the global oil market itself, which is shifting. The rise of US shale oil and renewable energy is weakening the cartel's grip on prices. For Nigeria, this means less money for its oil barrel, regardless of OPEC's efforts. So, is it time for Nigeria to go its own way? Leaving the cartel would empower the country to establish its own production targets, align oil output with its economic priorities, and adopt a more adaptable energy strategy. Of course, leaving isn't without risks. Nigeria would lose OPEC's support during global crises and its influence in international oil politics. But the question remains, do the benefits of staying outweigh the constraints of the membership? To answer this question fully, Nigeria needs not to rely on the local hero, but rather honestly assess the nation and its position in the world. Curious about what troubles and sabotages the local hero is dealing with? Check out our dedicated video about it here.